Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to this channel. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is an author, poet, and playwright, and former reporter and literary manager. His plays Savage World, Break of Day, and This Is Not What I Ordered have been published by Samuel French / Concord Theatricals. Other plays include In the Mood, Sizzle Sizzle, Blue Kiss, The Kitchen Girl, Fun with Freud, Scattered Blossoms, Vincent in the Asylum, Van Gogh's Zombie Movie, The Transformation Center, Bring Your Own, and The Blessing. His adaptation of Shalom Ash's God of Vengeance was produced off-Broadway, and The American Wife had its world premiere at the Park Theatre in London. He was 2019-2020 writer-in-residence at the Arc Theatre in North Hollywood, and he has also penned books and lyrics for 4 musicals. He is a graduate of the National Theatre Institute, Sarah Lawrence College, and received his MFA from Columbia University's School of the Arts. Please welcome Steve Fife.
Hey, thank you for that great introduction. Wow, I love it.
Well, thank you. So one thing that I haven't done yet, normally when I do this, it's usually I see people's works after we've talked, and I got to see yours the other night. You did a stage reading, Savage World,
right? And
the interesting thing that I really wanted to touch on was that it's a rewrite. It's a rewrite of your original of another piece of yours that was produced. It was produced at the Met.
Right.
We're talking the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, or no?
We're talking about the Met Theater in East Hollywood.
Copy, understood. Because I'm like, okay, but at the same time, so what changed? Why a rewrite?
So much changed. Well, first of all, the original play ended in 2008 with the election of Barack Obama, and the play deals with, as you know, with a lot of racial issues, and things looked hopeful there,
right?
And the play no longer worked. Didn't work as a period piece. To me, it just didn't work anymore. And besides which, there were always too many characters in the play. My original idea, I had done a number of plays that were more on the minimalist side. They were influenced by Pinter and Beckett and Mamet, and I wanted to do something completely different with this, partly because it was based on an experience that I had as a reporter working on the Hurricane Carter case back in the late 70s, which makes me 109. So. But I was a young guy who kind of bumbled into investigative work on this case. I mean, I was really an arts reporter, kind of yearning to do something different because I was young, and already I liked arts reporting because I spent 10 days on a movie set with Lee Strasberg. I interviewed Sandy Meisner 5 times. I got to hang with Stella Adler. I was like the one person she would allow to audit her acting classes. And, I met a lot of people who wouldn't talk to me as a playwright, but who were delighted to talk to me as a New York Times or a Village Voice correspondent.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was good. And, but after a while, and the thing is that the industry was changing enormously. There was no internet back then, obviously. This is pre-internet, pre-social media, pre any of that stuff. And so there was a freedom in speaking with high-profile people. They were actually, at that point, glad to have someone speak with them who knew the industry themselves, who knew it from different points of view, because I'd been an actor as well as a playwright, and I'd even done, stage managing. I mean, I loved the theater. I loved literature. I loved. So I wasn't just talking with them about kind of a promotional thing about their next thing, and as much as today that's all actors seem to talk about, back in that day, they really were bored talking about just promotional stuff, and they wanted a more serious. I mean, the ones I talked to anyway, were delighted to have a more serious conversation. But what happened was, agents and publicists and managers and producers started getting more involved in the whole process, and they began setting up, guardrails between you, the journalist, and the person you wanted to interview, profile, whatever.
Why do you think that is?
Because they wanted promotion. Their only interest was in making their client more sellable, or in making that particular project more visible.
Right.
And the last thing I wanted to do was to be basically an unpaid PR person. I was getting paid, but I was getting paid like a journalist. Which,
sure. Okay.
I think requires no explanation as to how poorly paid that would be.
Sure.
Plus, it's not like now where you're on Zoom, you just, you look things up on Google. I mean, then you had to go to the library to look everything up. You had to, arrange a meeting with somebody. And wouldn't be in a coffee shop because you wouldn't want the noise, so they had to let you kind of into their inner sanctum usually. Since I had no sanctum, I was just a freelance person. And and I like being freelance. In fact, I loved being freelance, because the more I worked for like one place, the more they felt they owned me. Mm-hmm. And could dictate what I did. And I like the freedom of being able to speak with people who otherwise weren't accessible to me.
Right.
And I did know a lot. I'd studied history of drama. I had, both as an actor and as a writer. And I was very well read. I happen to love books, and I still love books. It's just an addiction I can't cure myself of. But it was great to have that access at that time, because around 1980 to 83 was this transition time, and by 83, I found that it was all being controlled by agents now. And, if you wrote, because my whole thing was, I wanted to portray these iconic personalities as human beings, and, as people with greatness in them, but also with flaws, and sometimes, very large flaws. And I really wanted to get a balanced view of who these people were and what, in fact, their effect on the art form was. And, at the risk of seeming like one of those, aging hippies who, you run into at flea markets in LA, there was no better time for the theater in this country, in my experience, in the late 70s. It was remarkable where off-Broadway had a devoted audience. This is in New York, because I grew up in New York City. Mm-hmm. And really, New York City was all I knew until I went away to Carnegie Mellon as an actor for a year in 74, 75, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then I knew Pittsburgh, which is different than New York, but it's not like a world of difference. Still an East Coast city.
Right.
And, I just found in the late 70s in New York that all the people whose work I had loved, like in the early 70s, like Joe Chaikin, Richard Schechner, and, the experimental theater people, and the people, Robert Wilson, I mean, that you know, people who worked out of La Mama and the Public Theater, that was what I identified with. And those people, their careers blossomed in the late 70s. All these people were just doing remarkable work. And there were all these audience members who were not in the theater, who were lawyers and shrinks and, you know, professional people in offices who just loved the theater and would go and would ask intelligent questions and knew the work of these artists I admired, without having to be told by the New York Times or the Village Voice that you have to go see them. I mean, you know, there just was an audience of people who loved the work, and I felt part of a community at that time.
What changed?
Ronald Reagan. That's what changed. Ronald Reagan came in, and the first thing he did, at that time I had a federal writer's grant, which actually was both poetry and journalism. I was in a program called the CETA Artist Program, which was basically about, getting people jobs. But there are no jobs in the arts, really, unless you're an artistic director or, somebody who is, like I was a literary manager at a theater for a few years. Even back then, that was not enough money to live on. But through this grant that I had, I did have enough money to live on for almost 2 years from my work in the arts. And it also required me to work with, nonprofits that serviced, young people, old people, people who were kind of left out of the, the loop. And I thought it was great. I really learned so much. I had so many interesting experiences. I met so many great people. It just was a time of great optimism based on, all these. I mean, there were so many great dance companies, and I'm not, particularly. I'm not a, I'm more of a narrative person. Mm-hmm. So dance in and of itself wasn't, but there were just so many talented people, with Pina Bausch and Twyla Tharp and, just all these extraordinary thinkers who express themselves in dance. Meredith Monk, another one. I just loved their work so much. Mm-hmm. And then I met them and I loved them so much. And the people were just, remarkable, wonderful people who I was so happy to feel, among them. Part of what they were doing, is what I wanted to do. And I know a lot of people love Reagan or think that, he defeated Russia or whatever. But to me, he was the villain. He came in, the first thing he did was cut all the arts grants. Mm-hmm. That was literally like, just as soon as he had any power, we were all gone.
Which is interesting as a former actor.
Yeah, it's just, well, he no longer had any empathy for people who didn't toe a certain conservative, party line.
Sure.
That was the era of the NEA 4, those 4, I think they were mostly women. It was Karen Finley, Holly Hughes, I think John Fleck actually was one of them. John Fleck, mm-hmm. who I've seen a lot out here. And there was one other who now escapes me. But anyway, they were performance artists who had been funded by the NEA and whose work was, wildly unconventional, which to which I say, Yahoo! Right. That is what should be funded, but not in the world that Reagan, wanted us to live in.
Do you think we can ever get back to that?
Well, the pendulum does swing. I don't know if we'll ever get. If we get back to it, it'll be in a different world.
I mean, we're talking, 30 plus years. So
Yeah.
the fact that it hasn't yet, no matter what administration, but
I know.
mean, what needs to change or.
I mean, that, the whole thing about the late 70s that made it possible was that things were cheap. It was really cheap to, there were so many theaters because it was cheap to rent space. It was, you could charge $15, $20 for your tickets because you didn't have to pay actors a lot of money for them to live. I mean, everything was just much more affordable. And, and I met, God, I mean, there were never better parties than in the 70s, and I know, again, I sound like, one of those aging hippies with, with a grudge against the present. And I don't, there's things about the present that give reason for hope.
Sure.
And there are brilliant people working now. But I do feel like, most of us work with a dog collar on us. And if we go to a certain extreme, somebody pushes the button and we get zapped.
Right. Yeah.
There's just not that sense, and it's remarkable to me when I hear people say, "Oh, we're not supposed to say that anymore," right?
Yeah, yeah.
we're supposed to, we're supposed to put it this way, as if that's like progress,
Right? Yeah. There's so much to go down. There's so much material to go down that road with, as far as like where we've gone. I mean, even here, like I. Obviously not professional. I don't know when I say professional theater, I don't know what really makes professional theater, so I can't really say that. But I mean, even it was accessible, I would say 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Even 5 years ago it was accessible.
Yeah.
I could produce easily, and the lockdowns. I mean, this isn't the North Hollywood Arts District anymore.
No.
There's so many theaters that have closed.
There are.
And
the environment has just become. It's just it's a more hostile environment. Even if you're there, it's kind of like there is a kind of tacit feeling of like, why are you doing this now?
Right.
When even when I see plays, I mean, maybe the one place that escapes that is Rogue Machine, just because John Flynn does such terrific work, and kind of the work.
I'm not familiar with this.
Oh, you should. Yeah, he's at the, his stuff is at the Matrix. I'm going to see, one of his shows this evening, called Middle of the World. Nice. And yeah, his last, the last play that he did, which was, which has a odd title, and now I can't remember it. A beautiful title, The Turning of the Fourth Point, I think it's called, something like that. But it was all about kind of these young conservative Republicans being schooled by this older woman who had been conservative before Trump, and they're all like excited about Trump and what he's bringing, and she is much more of a kind of a Rockefeller, Goldwater Republican, conservative. And not enthusiastic about Trump. But the dialogue it was written by one of the writers on Succession, and Will Arbery, in fact, is a writer. But he's, just writes beautiful dialogue. And the actors were terrific. And, the show was being done at the Matrix. That's where they're, which is a beautiful theater in West Hollywood. And, it's going there, it still functioned as something that felt like theater was of the moment. Sure. But it's just really hard to, we have so much that is of the moment, and we have so many TV shows that are, we have a plethora of TV shows with different angles on our present dilemmas. Right, yeah. Which are so many. And, it's... Again, the question arises, why theater? Because if you can get your stuff done on TV, then you are going to reach a way bigger audience. You're going to get paid more, and you're going to set yourself up to, make a much better living.
Sure, yeah.
Than you are in the theater. It's like I had, when Savage World was first done at the Met Theater back in 2008, every week I had, like Clint Eastwood's producer would call and make reservations like every week, like every Saturday. He was coming to the show. And of course, he never came to the show. We always held like 2 tickets because, I would love to have worked with Clint Eastwood. And this is definitely the kind of, thriller about justice and, with the kind of slippery characters that he enjoys portraying. And Savage World almost got done years ago by Russell Simmons, who wanted to do it because he wanted to bring in all the 70s music that he wanted to sell. He had the rights to all these songs from the 70s. So, he wanted to do with Samuel Jackson, who, even though I wrote it as a heavyweight, and obviously Samuel L. Jackson would be a middleweight. Reuben Carter was a middleweight, so, I had no problem with that.
Sure.
But it's, just like Hollywood then and Hollywood now are not that different. People are all excited about something, and then somebody signs to do another project and makes that your project impossible.
Right.
And all the house of cards falls apart, which has been my experience out here. If I was somebody who really put my full belief into what people said on any particular day, I would have gone crazy long ago.
Yeah.
Really, in 2006, I pretty much had a breakdown out here because I had some big project with a guy who had won the Academy Award for screenwriting, and he wanted to work with me, and we did a project that, he wanted to direct it, and I just thought, woohoo, here we go. And he loved, he wanted to also do Savage World, with he had all these incredible actors, like Ving Rhames and all these people on speed dial who wanted to work with him. So, it all seemed great. And, and then his schedule changed. And, again, I no longer fit into his scheme of things. And things, just shriveled and died, as they often do out here.
But isn't that why theater?
Yeah,
because you said it earlier. Why theater? I just feel like that you have a little bit more control.
You do,
and say,
ideally anyway. Certainly, if you direct your own play, you have more control. Although I'm not a big fan of playwrights directing their own plays.
I'm right there with you. This has come up in numerous episodes. The first episode of Playwright Spotlight we did, there was my friend April Littlejohn, and I brought that up. I asked her, "Do you think playwrights should?" She's like, "No, I don't. I think I should direct my own play, but and that's I think it's important to kind of have another set of eyes. Now, I had Luke Yankee on a few episodes ago, and he did put up a good. For the first run, he did say, because he wrote very personal things. The play that he has in Long Beach right now is Marilyn, Mom and Me. It was about his mom, Eckert. Yeah. I think it's Eileen Eckert.
Eileen Eckert.
Yeah. And so they had done Bus Stop together, her and Marilyn. And so, so he'd written this personal play about him dealing with his mother's death. And, so absolutely. And that I can see that. If it's something very true to form, and very close to your heart and whatnot, I can understand that. But I'm of the ilk as well as you are. It's like, give it a fresh set of eyes. Let somebody else have it.
Yeah, in general, and there are some playwrights who are good directors also. Mamet is a good director, but not necessarily a Mamet's own plays.
Right. Sure. Okay.
I've seen a bunch of stuff, early on, that he directed brilliantly, but his own stuff, more and more, he treated the actors as kind of robots,
right?
To follow his commands, and that's pretty deadly.
Sure.
for theater. And I thought Shanley also. I love Shanley. Shanley's, to me, one of the great American playwrights, and he certainly influenced me a lot. But, I always felt that he made his own work more one-dimensional than other directors who did them. But, again, I understand also that impulse to protect your work. I don't think that's necessarily a creative impulse. But when you get power, people generally want to use the power that they're allowed. And that, that affects the way deals are made.
Yeah.
So when an agent can get you the power to direct your own thing and to get the actors, you want for it, and, that is the way the agent is showing how good he or she is at their job. And then, you're not going to turn it down. So, but I've never had that agent. The agents I have are always scrambling to, they're more like the Broadway Danny Rose type agents, are scrambling to get noticed amid the, CAA, UTA hustle.
Right, yeah. It's not always the case.
Yeah.
So going back, because I really kind of want to touch on exactly that. I get the Barack Obama. So what did you cut things out? Or what did you? Because so I'm curious what changed and why did you revisit this? I'm curious what. Yeah. So
well, it's one of the things is you put your heart and soul into something, and then you see it become basically obsolete. Mm-hmm. And then, so you want to see, well, how, can this still work? And I have that with most of my plays, some of which haven't gotten produced. And I have to realize, well, that moment for them to really hit the audience with full impact has passed. And I either have to find another way to grab where this moment is going to, or else just reconcile myself to the fact that this play is probably not going to get done. Or I can make it into a movie, and thankfully, I have that ability, to adapt something of my own. I am not like obscured by, I never find myself too close to the subject matter anymore, and that's only because I've been doing this so long.
But have those moments passed? I mean, do you really need to make those changes to make it relevant? I mean, the story's still there. It's still impactful. I don't see why a change in administration is really going to make something not relevant anymore.
Well, in the case specifically of Savage World is a realistic play.
Sure, okay.
It's a play that deals with public reality as well as private reality.
Sure, okay.
And that public reality had changed so enormously from the time, basically it was when the George Floyd, tragedy happened, that I thought, well, I can't, the optimism of the Barack Obama years is completely destroyed now. And it's, as it is, I kind of kept the same ending as I had before, but I wanted it to seem, more like the characters were hoping that they could overcome the obstacles than that they had overcome the obstacles. I wanted it to be that the characters attained a goodwill towards each other that they didn't have before.
Sure.
But I couldn't predict whether that in fact was going to work. Whereas in the Barack Obama years, or when, the year in 2007, 2008, leading to his election and then his assuming office, even though we were going through a terrible financial crisis at the time, and there was a lot of, negativity and pessimism rightly attached to that.
Sure.
In terms of race relations, it was a unique little blip in our history where all of a sudden you saw people talking about, post-Black consciousness and, post-civil rights world, and where it was no longer important to talk about race. that race had become kind of a, afterthought. That's, that Martin Luther King's vision of being judged on your character and not the color of your skin had been attained. Well, obviously, that did not happen. And very depressingly to some of us, we find ourselves in some kind of awful time loop where, the people who want to be forces of negativity and forces of reactionary politics have found themselves a voice and found themselves, having a lot of power. And, it's, dystopian novels were not nearly as popular before 2016.
Right, yeah.
It's like now every novel seems to be a dystopian novel because our reality has become a dystopian reality.
Yeah.
And the future certainly holds a terrible potential for, becoming more dystopian.
Sure.
And those of us certainly who have children, like my daughter is 24 now, and I've seen her have to deal with crisis after crisis, in this country, and, a feeling of kind of anxiety and hopelessness that is shared, within the Gen Z consciousness about where this country's going, because again, it's, you have, when you have a situation in which the 8 richest men in a country have more money than like 65% of the lower, quadrant of
the world at this point.
Yeah. It's like that was unimaginable. Certainly in the late, again, I'm not putting the late 70s was not perfect. God knows it was a great time for serial killers also. it was like serial killer paradise, because there was like no surveillance. Nobody could catch anybody. You could be a clumsy, a-hole with a gun and go out there and wreak havoc. In Los Angeles had just as bad a time as New York. I mean, the two, New York and Los Angeles, were both, haven for ill-intentioned violence. So it's ridiculous to talk about it as some kind of, paradise, but...
Well, there's your next play.
Well, there is a play in that, but I'm not sure... what I find today is that when you write plays like that, people say, "Oh, it's too depressing. I don't want to think about that." There's so much.
Fair enough. I guess they do need hope at this point.
Yeah, I just I find that kind of puts its finger on what I loved about the late 70s and what I find I have a problem with now, which is people's capacity to open themselves up to disturbing subject matter.
Right, sure.
And their willingness to go down dark roads with you. And their appreciation of going down that dark road and finding a reality that they themselves would not have been able to put into a cogent shape.
Well, I think it's a little more, I don't know if acceptable is the right word, but I mean, like, it's, the dark, depressing, and going, you take the serial killer aspect, Dahmer, the mini series or whatever you want to call it, and then,
well, you're right,
but also true crime.
I know,
the popularity of that, and like the podcast, and like my favorite murder, and like all these different things that have.
But see, that was another reason why I went back, to my play, because my play is a true crime play.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's based on a true crime that has never really had an answer. Never, there's no definitive answer as to whether Hurricane Carter was or was not involved in those murders. There's no definitive answer on who was involved. If it was not Hurricane Carter and John Artis, who the hell did, kill 5 white people in a bar in 1966?
Okay, so that's the creative license you took. You made it a Jewish couple,
right?
Opposed to
right.
Okay,
just because the main character was Jewish and it gave that character,
sure, okay,
something to be measured against.
It's a fascinating play. I really enjoyed it, and that's what I want to kind of touch on because I didn't want to stick around for the Q&A because
I'm glad
I
you didn't.
So when I had texted, I'm like, "How was the rest of the night?" And you're like, my daughter liked it. Mixed reviews, but my daughter liked it. I'm like,
yeah.
Now I'm curious. So what happened? Because, yeah.
Well, first of all, just to put my full feelings about it. First, I loved Interact Theater Company, produced the reading.
And I have a couple opinions in that as well. So not to interrupt, I do want to touch on where I think some of it came from, but I do want to hear.
Yeah, and I think they did a wonderful job. I was so appreciative.
The performances were great. I enjoyed everybody. There's not anybody who didn't like, well, that person's a little weak and didn't really, but everybody stood out.
And nobody pulled like a, kind of Hollywood, oh, this is just one night. And, everybody was very committed. And I felt a true sense of just being, part of a group with the actors, even if it was for a very short time. But
up until the commentary, up until the Q&A, how did you feel?
Well, this is the thing, is I have trouble with theater readings in general. And I used to, when I was literary manager at Primary Stages, I was in charge of the reading series. So I produced so many, readings myself. And readings really only give you the tip of a play's iceberg.
Sure.
They don't give you the theatricality of the play. Plays that do well in readings tend not to be plays that are going to be great in performance. Because they generally say everything in the narrative. They generally don't leave a lot unsaid. And they generally use they don't depend on like great lighting, great sound, other elements of theater which can't be done, in a reading.
Do you feel that Savage World falls into that?
Completely, because there's so much visual stimuli that are part of that play in terms of telling you things about, the era. It goes back and forth between 2019, 2020, right before the pandemic, and the mid to late 1970s.
Sure.
And again, there's so many wonderful things from the 70s that, so many visual stimuli that bring back, kind of Proustian recollections of that time to the people who lived through them and kind of make, an iconic statement to those who didn't live through them. But, oh yes, this event, that event. Oh yes, it frames it. But it also gives, again, what I started to say before was that I had written plays that were generally kind of dark comedies that derived from my love of Pinter and early Mamet. And I wanted to do something where there was so much plot, so much narrative, and people didn't have the luxury of just sitting back and feeling in control of what was happening. I wanted so much stimuli to hit them, and I wanted to get to their unconscious.
But I mean, but I feel that it works. To me, I haven't seen the production of it. I've seen the reading, and I think I would imagine that Savage World would work both ways. I think it works phenomenally as a reading. And I think it would still stay true to that in a production. And that's why I'm like, So I'm wondering if because you say there's certain plays that what in a reading that the narrative works, but it wouldn't work in production, and I don't feel that Savage World would be like that, because I think it works as the narrative's there and it tells you everything up front, but I still think that in a production, it would still work.
But,
so
designers are artists too, and designers. I mean, so for instance, the Angels in America. Which is a great play.
Sure.
And it works in just a production. It works without all the bells and whistles. But having seen the George Wolfe production, on Broadway with all the bells and whistles, to me, when I see a more stripped down version, I feel the lack of, it doesn't have the mythic quality to me. And that's what I'm talking about, is the mythic quality that designers can add to your work, that they visually make statements that hit you just as hard as, the best lines do. And the actors have all these other ways of revealing their characters. And the director has all these ways of kind of weaving a rhythm.
Sure.
And it's, again, I've worked with a lot of good directors. I haven't worked, with that many directors, who've kind of been, auteurs in the theater.
Sure.
Who really bring a brand of their own to a play. So, when they do a play, it's not just a Stephen Fife play, John Patrick Shanley play, but it's, Ivo Ho's, version of that, or somebody else, kind of building a world, adding his or her sense of reality, of stage reality to the writer's. But again, when I've seen theater that has knocked me out and that I remember forever, it's generally because of the collaborative aspect of it.
Sure.
And I love that. I started as a poet, and I loved theater, but I was self-conscious on stage, and it took many years of, I became an actor for a few years because everybody said, oh, your work is too literary. That was constantly what the criticism I got. And you need to feel, from the actor's point of view, how this, which is entirely different. The actor's reality really is everything from the subjective point of view of that character that he or she is playing. Right. And of course, the writer has to see the whole world, has to see the whole playing field. And which another big subject that there's not going to be time for, which is, actors writing plays. Like, there are a few actors who turned into, Harold Pinter was an actor. Who wrote, who ended up writing great plays. Sam Shepard was a writer who became an actor, and he became he got better. Right.
Well, that's that's where I was going when we talked. Before we started recording, we had talked about theater in Hollywood, in LA, and my issue with that is that I don't think it was a great time for theater back in the day. And I think the main issue for LA theater was because it was a showcase. Mm-hmm. It was some actors like, I'm gonna write this play, I'm gonna be the lead actor, and I'm gonna direct it, I'm gonna produce it, and it's all about me.
Yep.
And I just don't think that. A friend of mine, this guy I knew, his wife was the manager for Jim Carrey.
Wow.
And she refused to go see LA theater because she's seen so much bad work. And we were doing a Christmas show. This is a Christmas show that's been going on that I was involved with for 11 or 12 years. and it's still going on, and it's phenomenal. And
is it one of those Scroogey shows?
No, it's basically Kids in the Hall meet Carol Burnett dipped into Charlie Brown's Christmas. Oh no, I'm sorry. Kids in the Hall meets Chappelle's Show meets Carol Burnett dipped into Charlie Brown's Christmas, because it's a multimedia thing, and it's hilarious, and it's kind of a sketch,
right? And
it's a musical, and it's an all male. Well, it used to be an all male cast. They finally, after 20 years, brought in a female cast member. All that said, it's like he loved it, and I think he went a few times, and she refused. She's like, I can't do LA theater anymore, and I think that's the main reason why. And that's how I don't know if I feel that way now. I mean, I'm a little bit more lenient, having produced, but I still think that it's a transactional thing in LA. Is that for the most part, the small theater is actors supporting actors. Right. You don't get a lot of outside people.
Right.
For the most part in the smaller places, because it's like, did you come to my show last time? Then I will come and support you.
Right.
Or it's their, you're relying on your cast.
Exactly.
And that's what I think it is for LA. I think in the smaller markets, or even the larger markets, if you go to Chicago or New York or Vancouver, maybe.
There are pockets of subject matter that can draw other people. For instance, I have a few like dating comedies that I've written, and those tend to draw well.
Sure. Okay.
And I've gone to a lot of plays that have subject matter that would appeal to a gay audience, and that tends to draw well in LA. Yeah. But those are the only two pockets that I've found consistently, can draw a good audience.
Right. Okay, so commentary. So what happened? I leave. I don't stick around for the Q&A. And here comes...
Well, there's always people... There was one woman here, and I'm not... And I appreciate her comment, so I'm not...
Right.
If she's, by any chance, happens to hear about this, certainly not going to mention her name, but, she said she was confused. She was confused by the play.
Okay. And again, I have my... okay, keep going.
She didn't know, everything went so fast, and she didn't see how one thing led to another. And it's like, who are we supposed to be interested in? Was it our father-son play? Was it a play about, justice? Was it a play about race relations? She said all these things.
It's all of it.
It is all of it. Yeah. But it is all of it really within the context of the father-son play.
Sure, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what it starts with, and that's what it ends with. And he makes all these tapes to show to his son because of a history that they've never been able to talk about.
Sure.
Backstory that the son has concerning his mother that he's never known how to express that, and now the absence of having talked about that has led to an imminent tragedy that he's trying to prevent.
Okay, so that's one woman. Who else? What else? What else did you get? And then again, because I know exactly. To me, I know exactly what her issue is, but I want to hear if there was other commentary.
Well, that was, I would say that was the most. She went on for quite a bit. On that, and then, and there were some people who shared her feelings on, not to the degree that she had, but that, felt this or that could be, clear, could be clarified. And then there were some people who felt, no, I don't want the writer to hold my hand through this. I like that it's not, predictable.
Sure.
I like that it's, goes down avenues I didn't see coming, but once we get there, it does make sense. So, I got both sides of that, which was good. And like I say, my daughter tends to be, she's very, I ask her to be straightforward with me, and she is straightforward with me. And
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of that here in in LA. We don't want to, we risk hurting people's feelings or something to that extent. It's like, oh, well, and then behind closed doors, when you get home, it's like, oh my God, it was terrible.
I know.
So you can't be upfront with anybody.
It's tough, but again, having done this, I have been parts. I've been part of a lot of development workshops, theater development workshops, as a playwright, and man, some people have just been brutal with me. Brutal. Okay. I have taken slings and arrows that have been aimed at very tender parts of my anatomy.
Sure. So here's my take, and this is where I think that I think her confusion does not lie in the writing. I think her confusion lies in the fact that you had actors playing multiple characters.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think she was confused because I don't think she realized, even though it's clear in the dialogue, because the name switched, that she doesn't realize that this person's different than, there was I don't know his name.
Yeah.
Actually, I do know his name because I have it right here.
Yeah.
Is the guy that played
Lugo, probably.
Let me see. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben Thiebel. And so
he was terrific.
He was great.
God, phenomenal actor.
It was really great. But I'm wondering,
really
sometimes his inflections were similar with his characters, but because he played so many, I don't. There was even times I'm like, oh, okay, all right. I had to kind of glance down and take a look, and I'm like, I think that's really where it is, because I didn't realize that when he was we had already over to here, but I can't.
Yeah.
I hope that you didn't. I hope that you had that realization that you really didn't take her commentary, because to me, I mean, like I this is so judgmental. I'm so sorry. I kind of walked in. I'm like, there's so much pretension in that room. Those audience, they kind of, I'm like, you guys take yourselves way too seriously. I mean, I felt that even not being there for the commentary. I don't know. Maybe that's me. Maybe that's me projecting. I don't know.
I appreciated every person in that room because I've had too many readings in front of like 4 people.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, no, you guys added chairs.
Yeah. No, I had 2 readings in December that I produced and directed myself. Well, actually, I guess I did produce and direct both of them. No. The one of them was directed by a great actor, and he'll kill me. He's much bigger than me, so he could literally kill me.
Size-wise?
Yes, and probably talent-wise too. But he also ended up playing a role because one of the actors dropped out, so he had to play, and he was great. He's a great Michael Shepard. That's it. Yeah, terrific actor. Oh my God, and great director. And I thought he did a stellar job. But we had literally an audience of 2 people. So
what do you think? What was the difference?
Well, it was the holidays.
Okay.
And I just don't think I advertised it on Facebook, and I tried, and I went into people's DMs to invite them, and some people responded to those saying, "Oh, I'd love to, but I'm going to be in Tennessee, or I'm going to be in Hawaii, or wherever."
Sure.
They weren't in town, and and there was no getting to people who weren't in my very small circle of people who I'm really in touch with. So, c'est la vie. I still got a lot out of it. I did a rewrite, a massive rewrite, really, of the play that Michael Shepard directed. And I didn't think I was going to rewrite it. I thought it was there. And, I don't just need to see how an audience reacts.
Sure.
I could tell. I actually ended up reading the stage directions for that, which, because there were so few people there, generally I like to get somebody else to do that. Then I'll sit in the back and read the audience. Well, there was really very little audience to read. And it was just easier for me not to do a rehearsal for, I guess the one with Michael Shepard, actually a friend of mine, a woman actress, did read the stage directions. I read the stage directions for the completely new play of mine, Class Poet, which is an adaptation of my memoir, 13th Boy. And because it was a new play, that one had 4 people in the audience, I think, or 6 people. You know,
How big was the cast?
And my daughter and my ex-wife were two of the people.
How big was the cast?
The cast was 8.
They're not doing their jobs.
7, 8.
Come on, it's LA.
They didn't invite one person. Not
That's
one
what I'm
person was there
saying.
for the cast.
Obligatory theater, like I said.
And the cast was like 6 young actors and 1, middle-aged actor. And I thought, oh, these young actors are going to invite all their young, because generally young actors still have zillion friends from when they were in theater school.
This is a one-night only thing. It should be sold out.
Yeah,
or, well, quote-unquote sold out.
As you say, it's one of those, I'll come to your thing because I want you to come to my thing.
Mm-hmm, that's why.
And I thought for sure I was going to, and I had one actress in it who's like, oh, well, I actually did 2 readings of Class Poet because she couldn't do the original time, but she said, I'm supposed to be in this class at the same venue that you're doing the reading, and the class takes place at 7:30. So for your 5:30 reading, I'm going to get everybody from my class to come. Well, then she got COVID the night before, and not a single person from her workshop came to the reading. So these things, this is an LA theater story. That's any playwright could match that story with 12 to 200 of their own. I mean, LA theater war stories tend to be, I had the best actor and the rehearsal period was like a dream. And then the night before I get this call from the manager, she's going to have to drop out. She just got cast in a pilot. And sorry, we both love your play, but, and then you go to the actor who, was second in line for that role and she can't do it. And then you're going all the way down the line. And sometimes you end up with somebody really good, but most of the time you end up with somebody who's, your friend and they're doing it, to do you a solid because they feel sorry for you.
But, and that's the other issue with LA theater is because, the good people are they might book something. Yeah. And you can't blame them.
No.
I mean, there should be some integrity and commitment and loyalty, but at the same time, it's like you can't turn down that paycheck.
No. And I love actors. I really do. I was an actor myself. I trained as an actor. I have done both movies and plays, and I understand perfectly where actors are coming from.
Yeah.
LA actors do drive me crazy with their schedules.
Sure.
Because it's like I can't even schedule a Zoom rehearsal with LA actors.
Well, it's because they're all serving and bartending at night. That's
part of it. But they've all got a million things going on. They're in all these workshops and they're teaching. That's how they make their money, is they're teaching in their classes and but they really want to do your work and they're so enthusiastic.
Right.
So you don't want to lose that, but it is, it does just drive you crazy. That's why I often will direct my own readings, because adding a director's, availability is just one more, it's Chinese algebra times 20. I mean, you can't do it.
But I mean, directing a reading is one thing. Directing a production is a different thing. I think you can get away with directing a reading by all means. Not that I'm the arbiter of like what should be,
I agree. And I agree sometimes it's better for playwrights to direct their own readings, because within the structure of a reading schedule, it's often hard to communicate the nuances of your play.
Sure.
And this is not because directors are not brilliant people. They are, but usually they're just directing one thing, and then they're coming to your thing, and they've read it over once, and they have a general idea of what they want to do with it. Sure. But it's not their fault. They haven't lived with it the way the writer has lived with their play.
Sure.
I mean, my God, I have been in so many playwriting workshops, and I have run a few playwriting workshops, and I love the people who write plays are so committed and sincere, and it's a serious business to them, and unfortunately it's not to the rest of the world. It's just like poetry. I mean, again, I've been in so many poetry workshops, and I love poetry, and I love the nuances of poetry, and it just, that's why the poetry that people go to is like slam poetry, which, again, can be okay, but it doesn't have nuance to it. It's like one rush of one emotion.
Right. So 2 questions then, workshop-wise. What have you learned? What have you taken away from doing a workshop?
You mean in terms of a reading like this one?
No, just in terms of playwriting. When you've done a playwriting workshop, what have you taken away? What was the biggest thing that you came away with? It's like, oh my God, this something clicked.
Right. Every now and then, like I know that as a literary manager dramaturg, I've seen things click more than they actually I have experienced them as a writer.
Okay.
As a writer, I have been glad to get a workshop just because it's a step up from a reading, and there is a chance to go into some depth on the work, but it almost always ends up in that in-between place. Between something that, it has the passion of something newly created, and yet it hasn't found its shape yet.
Got it, okay.
It hasn't really, because as, it's a cliche, but there is also true to it that, an audience is essential to, a play's existence. Like a play doesn't work as literature. It's, you have to factor in both the actors and the audience, and it's the way the actors and the audience exchange energy with each other and relate to each other that makes it either a great experience or a forgettable experience. And, it's just those plays that do have some depth to them and that are going for something that doesn't live on the surface. It is very hard to get those across in anything less than a full production. And sometimes it's hard to get it across, until the third weekend, if you're doing weekends, or the third week of a full production. All of a sudden you start seeing these things. Oh, that's why that makes sense. And
how do you add depth to a play? How do you achieve that? How do you achieve depth?
It's just in terms of the emotional commitment and the way that actors have these sudden revelations that, oh, I'm not just trying to get her to, invite me over for dinner, but I'm also trying to find out, whether she's somebody, who will accept me, as a person with a flawed history or, they see the multiple, because as a writer...
Is that in the writing, though?
It is.
Okay.
It is,
But shouldn't you be able to articulate that when, in directing? Or do they have to,
when something has multi-layers to it, you can't expect all those layers to just suddenly plop into place.
And that's where I'm going. That's what I'm asking is like, how do you, as a playwright, how do you add those layers? How do you achieve that? I mean,
it's a matter of living inside a play as opposed to presenting something that is kind of a version done from the outside. It's like I've seen the play Bad Jews, and I remember the playwright's name, Joshua, somebody or other, who just...
Schwartz. I just said it's the first Jewish.
He has that play that's in New York, Prayers for the French Republic now.
Right, okay.
A really, really talented guy. But I saw that play when it was kind of done as like a comedy to make you laugh. And then I saw a production where it really went to all the disturbing emotions underneath related to the Holocaust and people who were young, way too young to have experienced the Holocaust at any level, but the way they had come to understand the pain that their grandparents had gone through, and it was still funny, but there were so many other colors, that were dark and light, and the funny was so much richer in how funny it was, and there was an emotional climax to it that there just hadn't been before. Even though it had been a successful comedy, I didn't realize like how much was going on there. I was a little bit aware, just because I am, I have been a dramaturg and I have been a literary manager, and you do read a million plays, and you develop an instinct for when there's depth that needs to be explored there. There's, especially as a dramaturg who's trying to improve a play with a playwright, you see, the playwright open up a chasm of emotion and then not deal with it. And then you tell the playwright, and the playwright says, well, that's kind of a whole different play. Like if I go down there, and you're like, well, maybe that is your play.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe when you go down there, you're going to find out that your play has much more dimension to it than you gave it credit for.
Sure.
But that takes, and that's what dramaturgs can do. They bring in an outside, perspective based on having read a lot of plays and having worked on, developed a lot of plays into something that is greater than what it started with. On the other hand, I've worked with a lot of dramaturgs who have, and I'm not going to dump on Yale School of Drama, but, it seems like NYU Tisch and Yale School of Drama have turned out a lot of dramaturgs who just think they know everything. And they will come in there and they will tell you things about your play that they feel confident they know and you don't. And that does piss me off.
No, absolutely. It's funny you say that, because there's a great theater festival. It's been going on for 68 years called Linnea. It's up in Sacramento. And this one girl, student playwright, had come in and she brought this piece, and I'm asking what the history or, where it's gone. And she had gone to NYU for and had a professional actors and a professional playwright or something to that extent. They did not do it justice. I'm sorry to say this. It was a terrible play. They did not do it justice. There's so many different directions it could have gone. And I'm like, wow. And so I don't know. It's interesting that you say that, and I don't know where. I don't know. Maybe that's just the the name and the reputation. And
you talked about walking into the room and feeling a sense of pretension.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily feel it the other night, but I know that feeling in general.
And maybe pretension wasn't the right word, but it just seemed like everybody. It just seemed like they took themselves so seriously. I don't know.
Yeah. I tend to work best in, and again, I loved. There's so many actors in that room who.
And forgive me if I'm commenting about anybody of your friends. If there was a room full of friends, I'm sorry.
There were a lot of different people in the room, and I couldn't typecast, the audience in any way. And like I say, I just appreciate when people do show up, because
of course,
you're asking people to come out of their house in the evening in LA, find parking, probably not eat a full dinner or rush their dinner down.
Sure.
And then get there and not be in control of their time. And we've all become very much about crafting our own time frames.
Right.
That we like to be in control of how our evenings develop. For the most part, that is something that has come with cell phones. Again, not a reality that existed before. Before cell phones and the internet, you just kind of assumed that you were going to have to go out into the world and make things happen. And now you could stay home and make things happen.
Right.
And most, the people who get the most famous and who have the most power do the least accommodating of other people's schedules.
Right.
That is the mark of being, powerful in our society. So when like a Jeff Bezos shows up for something, everybody goes, "Oh my God, this has to be like the most amazing thing in the world because this guy could go anywhere.
Right.
He could get tickets to anything." And and it just unfortunately, well, I don't know. I'm not going to go down the Trump lane, but it's just like there are so many things about manipulating people that have also become easier to do and that people have become more expert at. And there's a certain amount of people wanting to be manipulated, wanting to be told what to do.
Right.
That did not exist in the world, I came from. And that's why I do feel sometimes like a visitor from another planet.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I still have the perspective, I'm not, again, I don't live in this archaic reality of, and I don't sit around going, "Oh, we did this so great in the 70s and the 90s.
Sure.
The 80s sucked. I'm sorry for those people who have fond memories of it, but
I love the 80s.
I screamed from 1980 to 1988. It's just I never stopped screaming.
Sure.
It was like a primal scream that lasted 8 years. Until the end of what was the Iran Contra. That was the end for me. That was the end of the 80s. When you had Oliver North and all those people up there,
right?
Showing how they had subverted democracy and created a shadow state that was actually in control of the country. And gee, doesn't that sound a bit familiar to what we have now? And, I do feel a terrible sense of disappointment in both the American people and the American audience. Yeah. I do feel like we have, as an audience, and I say we because I am part of the American people and the American audience, but, that as a country, we have not lived up to our mission statement.
Right. Yeah.
In every field, we and Americans always like to, like there's this whole, this is the difference between New York and LA. I mean, people are always asking me, because I grew up in New York and I didn't leave there until I was, like 40, 42. And then I've been here for, for over 26 years. And, so I really have had a large chunk of, both realities. And in New York, people in my eras did not feel the need to always be so positive. I mean, there was a joy. You could go overboard in, a lot of people were too barbed. They were, the kind of loved, being Oscar Wilde and, and having, like negative barbs on everything. And right. my playwriting mentor was John Guare, and there was no greater, barbmeister than John Guare. I mean, and again, being his student, he would devastate me with his comments on my stuff, just devastate me. And he would make me feel, terrible. But there was a point.
Was there truth to it?
Well, there was a truth to it because I was not a good playwright when I started out. And I've tried to explain this to people. And I think it's something that would only make sense in the reality that I lived in, in the 60s and 70s, where the emphasis was put on stretching your, what you could do, in not kind of like going to what you were best at necessarily, but kind of doing things that you weren't good at, so you could kind of get better all around.
Right.
And like that's how I went to Carnegie Mellon as an actor, and I got kicked out after a year because I did a lot of experimental stuff that I was trying to see what I could do.
Sure.
To me, that was what school was about.
Exactly. That's what it was.
Yeah. I just was like, okay, I know I could do this. I could play that part in my sleep. Why would I want to play that in school?
Sure.
So I would play roles that I wasn't right for, and then I would get feedback like, you're not right for this role. Why are you playing it? I would be like, I'm trying to stretch myself.
Sure.
And they go, do you ever want to work? Do you want to make a living? And, it was a difference in philosophy.
Sure.
So that ultimately I was probably better off being kicked out of the school.
Right.
Even though it didn't feel good at the time.
So the follow-up question for workshop wise is what did you learn when you were teaching workshops? The one when you did teach, what did you learn in that regard as a playwright?
Well, I learned, I frequently overestimate what I believe people are capable of. I would say that's my flaw, but also what's good about me as a teacher is that I believe, and I truly believe I could fix almost any play. Like,
careful, I might send you something.
I mean, again, I can't make every play into, a bestseller,
no, of course,
but I could make every play, I believe, into the best version of itself.
Okay.
And that's what working with nothing but new plays, for 5-6 years at primary stages, when I was still a fairly young person, I was in my 30s. I wasn't, that really gave me, when you do it enough, again, it does become an instinct. Like I can just tell when a play is going off its rails. I can tell when a writer has, when a famous writer has resisted doing something that was better for their play because they had like lines that they were in love with and they couldn't bear to cut.
Kill your darlings.
It's just not, yes, in theory, kill your darling, but if you're a really great playwright, or if you're a playwright who's had great success, not so easy to do, if you're being asked by somebody who's just out of, a grad school.
Sure.
To make a major change in your play.
But isn't there the philosophy that, look, you save that, put it in a different play. You don't have to get rid of it altogether. Just save it for,
right.
For something that might be better. Maybe this isn't the play that it belongs in, I guess.
Well, it's so funny you say that because that's what I observed with John Guare, because I was in a play of his at a very early stage when it was being developed, and I saw him like cut things out and then put those very lines into the mouths of completely different characters in completely different plays. And I thought that was so weird. Like, how could you think that line would also, but it often worked,
sure,
but in a different way. And again, John is a playwright who overwrote. He wrote so much. He always writes so much. He's very passionate about his characters. And this particular play, was the first read through we did of the play was 4 hours and 15 minutes of a comedy. Wow. And a really dark comedy too. And I loved it. I loved all 4 hours and 15 minutes, but the actors in it, starred James Woods and Piper Laurie and a bunch of other, people who had, careers and experience and everything. And, they knew that this was not going to be, the audience was not going to be thankful for 3 intermissions in a summer theater. Yeah, it was not going to work. But, again, John was somebody who was so passionate about the art form. And that's what, he did communicate to me, and I am ever thankful for that.
Sure.
And that's, in workshops I've run, that's all I've really tried to communicate is a love and a passion for the art form, and a way to apply it to your play that, will allow the playwright to experience a sense of freedom and joy in his or her work. Because God knows you can't trust the world to to celebrate you, but I'm not a negative person, but I'm also not like a fount of positivity.
Sure.
Because then you can't believe anything those people say. If everything is wonderful, then what is when are you ever going to grow, and how are you going to grow? Sure.
Yeah. What did you learn as a literary manager in that regard? How did that help your playwriting? What'd you learn? What was coming in?
It did help my playwriting a lot, because it took me out of my own head so much.
Okay.
And I could see how other writers had strategies that I hadn't even thought of.
Like, can you give an example? I know.
Well, David Ives was somebody who was, I knew very well at the time. He was unknown. There were a few one-acts of his that have been very successful in off-Broadway festivals, but he himself was as poor a person as I've ever met. He literally lived at New Dramatists, and the theater I worked at was located 2 blocks from New Dramatists. So again, I was over there all the time, and he lived off the remaining cold cuts from, it's like when there were readings, there'd be cheese and cold cuts and bread that would be put out for people, who came to the reading, and that's what he subsisted on.
Wow.
And he lived in one of the rooms above, I saw a bunch of his readings there. He was always funny, but I saw him, develop as a playwright, because his one acts were always great. He could always write great one acts, but he, it wasn't until he did All in the Timing,
right?
And Primary Stages, the theater I worked for, did the first production of All in the Timing, and I was no longer. I had been his dramaturg for a play of his called Ancient History, which is not known as well. It's a full length about a relationship between a Jewish guy and a Catholic woman. It's good, it's funny, but actually would have worked better as a one act than it did as a full length. But I got to know David through that. And then when he had All in the Timing, he was very nervous, because he kind of felt like this was his make it or break it play. It kind of was unrealistic to think that 6 one-acts, an evening with 6 one-acts, was going to be commercially successful. But at the same time, he was desperate. He had no money. And that whole thing of living in New Dramatists, you could only go on for so long doing that. So he really was desperate for a hit. And so he had me. I knew the director, Jason Buzis, of that production. I was friends with both of them. So he had me sit in on the last week of rehearsals, kind of sit in the back as an unofficial dramaturg and give him notes. And for the most part, my notes were about how brilliant this was and how he should trust his material.
Right.
And the actors were brilliant, and and there were just, when you have 6 plays, there are lots of transitions between plays. So that was mostly what I gave him notes about. But again, he's a brilliant guy. It's a brilliant play. And I did not expect it to be like a huge hit. And it was a huge hit. It's like, it was reviewed like 3 times in the Arts and Leisure section, by Vincent Canby, who was like a huge, influence at the time as a critic. And, and then it's like one of those moments that live in my brain as kind of an iconic playwright moment. It's like at the end of that, and I, no longer got my calls returned by David. He hardly ever picked up his phone anyway, but you kind of leave him a message, and my messages were simply how great the show was and how happy I was for him, and how great it was to see a playwright get appreciated as he should be, by a larger audience than just your friends and family.
Sure.
And so it was New Year's Day of, I guess it was like 1993, I think it was. And I remember it was a snowy day. There was hardly anybody out. And for some reason, I was in Herald Square outside of Macy's. And I was walking along this plaza, and I saw David walking towards me. And, David Ives is a tall, crane-like man. Very thin, just these long legs, and it was just unmistakably him.
Right.
And I saw him walking towards me, and I got this big, grin on my face, and I walked towards him, and I kind of I got more, like my pace, got faster as I got closer to him, and then all of a sudden I saw him like running past me.
Oh no! Oh jeez!
And then his long legs running away from me as if I was a process server who had come to give him his divorce papers or something. Or his papers to show up in court for some debt situation, and I was like, what? And to this day I never got to ask David what that was about, but I asked mutual friends of ours, and they said, since he's become the kind of flavor of the year, all his playwriting friends who he would ask favors of for years now ask favors of him, and now ask him to return the favors and he has come to the point where he doesn't know how to react to that. So rather than have the conversation and leave it up in the air, he will just avoid the conversation.
Yeah.
So I guess that what was happening, but it was like,
Wow.
It was very, there's so little actual fame in the theater. It's such a, what I came to see when I moved to LA was what a bubble New York is. Of course, LA is a bubble too. But the bubble of LA is about work in the industry that, if it gets made, will have the potential to be seen by people outside of LA.
Sure.
It's hopefully you have people across the world seeing your work,
right,
on streaming services or whatever. Whereas the bubble in New York is just all about New York.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's all about being a big, force within, it's the big fish in the small pond.
Right, yeah.
And just how small a pond that is not clear while you're in New York, because again, it's rare that anybody gets to be a big fish, especially among the playwriting world.
Right.
That at any one time, there aren't that many Tony Kushners. There just aren't.
Yeah.
There even now there's, plays win the Tony, but that writer doesn't necessarily stay in the minds,
right,
or become a household name.
Sure. Yeah.
It's only, a few playwrights, mostly who have, who also get work as screenwriters. John Robin Bates being another, who writes a lot. And, I saw all these, I knew Kushner when he was the literary manager at the Public. I was literary manager at Primary Stages, and we were both dealing with new plays. And I would mostly talk with him on the phone, and he was always an erudite guy, always a pleasure to speak with him because he did love theater so much and he did talk about it with such passion. But again, if you ask me, is this a guy I think is going to be famous? I'd say no, because he is too squarely, in the weeds of theater. He loves things that's, the mainstream audiences are simply not going to get.
Sure, yeah.
And also at that time, I mean, gay subject matter had not made the jump into the mainstream. I mean, Angels in America really achieved that. Where, and I people often talk about me, if they talk about me at all, as some Forrest Gump of the American theater, because I have been so many different places and known so many different people, and yet not myself been a famous person, to get into those rooms. And part of it came because my mom was a politician in New York politics and got offered tickets to things that she never had time to go to. So she would offer me the tickets, and so I ended up in a lot of opening nights.
Nice.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Things I could never have afforded, but I would be there in primo seats, sitting next to, big celebrities. But also, I wrote for, I was a theater features writer for the Village Voice, in the late 70s. I knew Meryl Streep when she was just starting out. I was friends with Raul Julia. These people were accessible to me because, they wanted to be talked about in the Village Voice. And, and that was, I represented something that had far more positive than negative possibilities for them. So, and when I wrote for the New York Times, forget about it. It's like, I got everybody's publicist calling me saying, well, we see you can, get pieces in the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. And, and my client really would like you to, come and, perform a sexual act on him in print. and I would kind of say, well, I'm not really into performing those acts in print.
Sure. Yeah.
I really kind of go my own way.
Right.
And no, I'm not going to submit my article to you beforehand for your approval.
Right. Yeah.
And that would usually, end that conversation.
One last thing, because it was something that really stood out to me at your reading. How do you achieve writing natural dialogue? I mean, there's such a flow state for you, as far as it really goes into it's so natural.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I was even one of those people, like when your play is starting, I'm like, what's going on here? Yeah. And then it just everything starts to fall into place. I'm like, and that's just like getting to that and seeing that arc or where everything starts. I mean, how do you do that? How can a playwright, how does a playwright learn that?
Trial and error, and really it is practice. And I know that's a cliche, but for me, I look back on the stuff I wrote when I was in grad school at Columbia, and a lot of it, was garbage. And, but I would say that having been an actor does help me a lot.
Okay.
With the realistic dialogue. 'Cause I know, when I write dialogue, I really put myself in the place of the actor and say, there are simply a lot of things that are hard to say. There are a lot of words in English that are hard to say. There are a lot of words in English that are hard to say in combination with each other. And it's not that people wouldn't necessarily use that combination of words, but that the actor is likely going to be in trouble trying to say that combination of words and stay in the flow of the play. And so I have gotten very good at, I really, the other thing is I really let the play dictate to me where it goes. Like, I don't come in saying, I obviously know, okay, this play is dealing with, this is what's at stake. You have to, as a playwright, you have to know, the arena in which your, stuff is taking place. You have to have a basic sense of, what's at stake for your characters. Yeah. But within that, I really try to let these characters speak for themselves as much as possible. And I don't do long backstory. I started out, and maybe it's because I did start out as an actor writing, 13-page backstories for my characters, and and trying to, find every possible nuance of that character. But I don't do it anymore because, for me, the characters exist within the world of the play.
Right.
They don't just exist, within any world. And there are things that they're going to say that only make sense and only ring true within the world of what that play is about. So, and sometimes that play has lived inside you for a while.
Right.
And by the time you get to writing it down, it comes, leaping out of your imagination, almost, as an entity, and the dialogue is part of that entity. But I also, the writers I love, with like a lot of Arthur Miller, Death of a Salesman has such great dialogue, and and I studied, Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, William Inge, again, all these guys who are ancient now, and who are thought of as, kind of part of a different American theater than what exists now.
Yeah.
But, they, again, I studied them first as a scholar, then as an actor, and then that kind of combination really, really stayed with me. And the English language is very expressive. But God, there are people, it can also be quite clunky.
Sure.
And, I also, I've written a novel, I've written 2 memoirs. So I do pride myself on my flexibility as a writer. I really tried to have, different, different sides of my talent. And again, that was part of the world I grew up in the late 70s. It's like, that was part of Richard Schechner and other people who made the point that writing is part of that. There's the art forms are all structured differently than each other. There's a particular structure that works from one art form over another. And certainly when I tried to write plays, that's what was so bad about my early plays, is that I wrote, in a kind of, I had written short stories that were, very along the New Yorker line of short stories that were kind of winsome, with an authorial voice that was often Cheever-esque, or, J.D. Salinger-esque, that had that certain kind of sense of humor of the, a comedy, that was on the dark side and all of that. And, but one of my first plays, it didn't really read. It, it came off as as pretentious. And I can be quite pretentious. I'm very, as like I had to confront a lot of my things, having gone through all these schools. I went through 3 undergraduate departments, and then I went through a graduate department, and plus I took workshops with so many playwrights and different people, and it takes a while before you find out what you do well. And that goes back to what you said about when I've run workshops myself. I try to help writers really zero in on their strengths and also see their weaknesses and how they can apply their strengths to their areas of weakness and become stronger and less predictable in that way. And it's sad to me that that there isn't an audience out here that I've seen that will show up, to see something that may be different from, people generally show up out here to get entertained.
Right.
This is the entertainment capital.
Right.
And everybody wants, an experience, but one that they can also like go online and recommend. And everybody writes a Yelp review now.
Yeah.
And it's like, I studied, and again, this marks me down as, an old guy, an ancient personage, but I actually was in a playwrights director's workshop with Harold Clurman, the founder of the group theater, and really the great kind of religious preacher of the strengths of the American theater. I studied with him at the Actors Studio in New York back in 1977, 78, which, again is, and I saw, and Israel Horovitz was teaching a workshop for, a specialty workshop, which he didn't feel I was good enough to be in, frankly, yet. And but he allowed me to audit it. And, that had, Shanley and Peter Parnell and Richard Viteri and a lot of other great playwrights who, whose work I marveled at because they had a fluency that I wanted. And the ironic thing I think about my career is I've achieved the fluency, but at this point, all the people who would appreciate it are dead. It's like, I think I've outlived my audience.
Now you got to find the new one. Well, on that note, where can people find your work?
Well, as you mentioned, I have 3 plays published by Concordia. And Savage World has been published 3 times so it's a little bit confusing.
Sure.
Like they published the 2008 version in 2014, and then they published I wrote a 2016 version that just cut down on the number of characters because there were quite a few subplots that had to do with the blacklist and other things that I came to realize were just too much for the play to deal with. So then I cut it down and they published that version. And then I, really revamped it in 2021 and I had a huge battle with them. But they finally submitted and published it. But they wanted me to, pay them to publish it. I'm going like, nope, that's not going to happen. So I have to say that I'm grateful for that. But the piece of mine that gets performed the most is I have 6 one-acts of my own called This Is Not What I Ordered. And they're all plays. They're all dating comedies that take place in restaurants or bars.
Nice.
Yeah. And they're all 2 or 3 person plays that have very little in the way of, it's all tables and chairs and actors, and they're easy to do, and they get done a lot in acting classes, or that's what people tell me anyway. And I have a lot of monologues. I've had monologues in a lot of those, best monologues of the 21st century, or, I've even edited some of those books, and not been, ashamed to put my own monologue in.
Nice.
It's, again, it's one of those things, if you don't love yourself, who's going to love you?
Right,
kind of things. And so I've overcome, whatever sense of shame I had about that and done that. But it's, it used to be fun to have the Samuel French bookstore in LA.
Yeah.
And that was a great place to do readings, and that was a great place to meet people and just kind of like go, not just in plays, but also indie films and, even to some extent buying, screenplays of, films that had achieved success, but, had a lot of substance to them as well.
Sure.
And weren't just at the moment. And, I was, you had a bunch of events there. The people were wonderful, and they had their own parking. I mean, what more could you ask for?
Right.
And I am hoping to, I'm in the process of negotiating to gain control of a space in Venice on Lincoln Boulevard and Victoria, which it's a large banquet hall that is owned by the United Methodist Church in that space, and I'm hoping to open it up as an arts hub.
Nice.
That's with lots of different artists kind of being able to work with each other and cross-pollinate and, run classes out of there. And that is my hope. And, where I'm going to fit that in my life, I don't know. Because it's not like, writing does take up a lot of time.
Sure. Yeah.
But I have, the one thing about the lockdown is, and this goes for most of my friends who are writers, that they did a lot of writing over the lockdown. Yeah. And things that they had never had time for, suddenly they had time for. So, we're all out there around town hawking our,
Sure.
Our wares from that period of time. And I have like 15 screenplays that I finished now that I'm trying to get done, and, a bunch of TV things. And, it just was a time where, where you would usually write only the pilot and do a treatment and maybe kind of indicate like the Bible of what you would,
right.
Then you had more time than you knew what to do with. And especially people like me whose, relationships broke up over the, that period of time. And then, and I wasn't able to see my daughter much. She was out of college and living on her own and not in my bubble, as it were. She's kind of in a bubble with her mom, but my bubble was quite exclusive and quite empty. So it gave me a lot of time to,
Sure.
Throw a lot of things against the wall and see what stuck.
Sure. And finally, are you on the socials?
Yeah. I'm on Facebook as Steve Fife. Mm-hmm. I'm on what used to be Twitter and now X as Twisted Hipster 8. And I have a book of poetry called Twisted Hipster, lest anybody think I'm trying to somehow describe, a much more twisted life than I actually lead. But I'm on Instagram, again, as Steve Fife.
Right.
But I tend to start, I'm not a great self-publicizer.
Sure, yeah.
I'm just not. It's something that seems to become much more naturally to people who've grown up, just working in social media.
Yeah.
I always feel a little bit like a phony when I'm like, come see my piece. It's the greatest. And, and this and that. And also when I do try to be that person, I could see people seeing through me. I can see people going, oh, he's saying that, but,
Right.
But, I really hope to get my, the thing about writing is that hope does spring eternal. It's the cliche about, artists, but it's also true. If you don't have hope, you basically shouldn't be in the business because, especially in LA, and the thing about New York is it's hard. There are fewer slots than ever to do new plays. It's really hard to get new plays done in New York. And if you get your new play done, it's hard to get it done where there's any budget for publicity. And even if there is budget for publicity, it's really hard to do the kind of publicity in New York where people notice you.
Right. Yeah.
There's just so much going on. There's just always so much going on. Whereas out here, if you are the right person at the right time in the right place, you could have struck out 60 times in a row. For the 61st time, you can suddenly vault into being the showrunner for some piece you never thought anybody was going to be interested in, and suddenly you're everywhere. It's a very unpredictable, and I love that about LA. Although it hasn't happened to me, so I love it. In theory. Sure.
Well, Steve, thanks for coming on to this episode of Playwright Spotlight.
Absolutely, Jim. I really, I love, I love the forum that you offer here. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And I hope to continue this conversation with friends and people I don't yet know.
Absolutely, likewise. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.